There are men people fear because they shout, and then there are men people fear because they never have to. Damien Crowe belonged to the second kind. In the heart of Manhattan, inside the golden lobby of the Kingsley Meridian Hotel, where crystal chandeliers burned like captured stars and million-dollar smiles floated over champagne glasses, his silence controlled the room more than any weapon ever could. The city knew him as a private investor, a man whose name appeared beside luxury towers, shipping companies, and political donations. But beneath every polished floor of New York, his name traveled in a darker whisper. Damien Crowe was the king of an empire built on secrets, loyalty, fear, and absolute control. When he entered, conversations softened. Waiters moved close to walls. Men with too much money suddenly remembered humility. Women lowered their eyes without knowing why. No one blocked his path. No one touched him. No one tested him. That night, the hotel hosted a charity auction for children's hospitals, all white roses, black tuxedos, and fake mercy. Damien stood near the marble staircase, dressed in a tailored black suit that made him look less like a guest and more like a verdict. His men formed a quiet perimeter around him, but he did not need them. Power clung to him naturally, cold and invisible. Even his breath seemed measured, as if the whole room waited for his permission to continue living. Then Ivy Brooks forced her way through the crowd. She did not belong there. Everyone saw it instantly. Her blue dress was simple, rain-speckled at the hem, her hair loose from running, her face pale with desperation. But her eyes were not weak. They were burning. Poor, cornered and trembling, yes, but not broken. Fear moved through her body, but something stronger moved behind it. A security guard reached for her arm. Ivy pulled away. "Miss, you cannot." She did not stop. She crossed the lobby straight toward Damien Crowe, and every step made the air tighter. Heads turned. A senator stopped mid-laugh. A glass froze halfway to someone's mouth. Damien's men shifted, but Damien lifted one finger, barely an inch. They stopped. Ivy came close enough to see the darkness in his eyes. Her heart pounding so hard it looked painful. For 1 second she seemed to lose her breath. Then she looked at him like he had stolen the last safe thing in her world. Damien's expression did not change. Ivy's voice came low, shaking, but sharp enough to cut through the room. "You think everything is yours." A faint murmur moved through the lobby. Damien stared down at her, calm as winter. Ivy stepped closer. "My brother. My home. My mother's shop. You take, and everyone bows because they are scared of your name." One of Damien's men moved again, anger flashing across his face, but Damien's hand remained still at his side. His silence was more dangerous than rage. Ivy's chin lifted. "I am not scared enough." Then she slapped him. The sound cracked across the Kingsley Meridian like thunder trapped under glass. The world stopped. No music. No laughter. No clinking crystal. Even the chandeliers seemed to hold their breath. Ivy's palm remained raised for half a second before she realized what she had done. Around her, fear exploded silently. People stepped back as if the floor beneath her had turned to fire. Everyone knew what should happen next. A girl did not strike Damien Crowe and remain standing. A desperate woman did not humiliate the king in public and walk away safe. His power demanded punishment. His empire demanded an answer. His men waited for the smallest command. But Damien did not move. His face had turned slightly from the force of the slap. A red mark burned across his cheek. Slowly, terribly slowly, he brought his gaze back to Ivy. No violence came. No shout. No threat. Only his eyes darkening with something far more dangerous than anger. Ivy's breath caught. For the first time that night, Damien Crowe looked at someone not like property, not like prey, not like an enemy in a coming war. He looked at Ivy Brooks like she had just become mine. And in that frozen lobby, before betrayal, before bloodless war, before the poor girl became a queen beside the king of New York, one truth began to rise. She was not a victim. She became powerful. Then Damien leaned close, his voice dropping into a deadly whisper. "Who sent you?" Long before Ivy Brooks walked into the Kingsley Meridian Hotel and slapped the most feared man in New York, life had already taught her what real fear looked like. It was not a dangerous reputation or expensive bodyguards standing in tailored suits. Fear was watching unpaid bills pile across a kitchen table while pretending everything would somehow work out. Fear was hearing her younger brother promise he was fine even when hunger made his hands shake. Fear was standing beside her father's hospital bed years ago, listening to machines breathe louder than he could. Those moments had carved something inside Ivy that refused to surrender, no matter how impossible the fight became. She lived in a tiny apartment above her late mother's neighborhood bookstore, one of the last independent shops that had survived the city's relentless wave of luxury development. Every morning she worked 2 jobs, every evening she helped children from the neighborhood study inside the nearly empty store. She believed that kindness still mattered even when the world rewarded greed. Friends often told her she carried too much responsibility for someone her age, but Ivy never complained. She simply kept moving because stopping meant accepting defeat, and she had promised herself long ago that no matter how difficult life became, she would never allow hardship to define her. She was not a victim. She believed survival was earned one choice at a time. Then Damien Crow's empire reached her street. Officially, his corporation announced an urban redevelopment project that promised prosperity, investment, and new opportunities. Television cameras praised the project. Politicians smiled beside polished blueprints. Newspapers celebrated progress. But the people living there knew another truth. Families received impossible legal notices. Small businesses disappeared almost overnight. Owners who resisted suddenly found themselves trapped beneath debts they had never created. Nobody could prove wrongdoing because every document appeared perfectly legal. Every signature looked authentic. Every courtroom decision favored the corporation. It was control hidden beneath expensive paperwork. Among those trapped was the one person Ivy loved most in the world, her older brother Ethan. He refused generous offers to abandon their mother's bookstore because he believed memories could not be replaced with money. Weeks later, he was accused of financial fraud involving documents he had never seen. His bank accounts were frozen, his reputation destroyed, and every lawyer he approached quietly refused the case. People who had once stood close to him crossed the street to avoid speaking with him. Loyalty vanished the moment Damien Crow's shadow appeared over their lives. Ethan never blamed Damien directly. He simply said that powerful men never dirtied their own hands. They built systems that crushed ordinary people while remaining untouchable. Those words haunted Ivy every night. Then Ethan disappeared. Not kidnapped. Not arrested. He simply vanished after promising to meet someone who claimed to possess evidence exposing the real architects behind the redevelopment project. His phone went silent. His apartment remained untouched. The police dismissed him as another adult who had chosen to leave voluntarily. Ivy knew better. Every instinct screamed danger. For 3 endless weeks she searched alone. She visited shelters, hospitals, legal offices, and abandoned neighborhoods where rumors spread through frightened whispers. Every path eventually circled back to one name spoken carefully, almost silently. Damien Crow. No witness dared accuse him openly. No evidence connected him. But his empire stood behind every closed door she encountered. The easier choice would have been to stay quiet, to accept that ordinary people could never challenge a king who controlled politicians, corporations, and entire districts of the city. Friends begged her to stop searching before she destroyed herself too. They told her survival meant staying invisible. But every warning only strengthened her resolve. She already understood the consequences before stepping into that hotel. She knew his bodyguards could remove her within seconds. She knew influential people would never stand beside her. She knew confronting Damien Crow could erase the little safe life she still possessed. Yet when she finally stood close enough to look into his cold eyes, something unexpected happened. The trembling disappeared. Her breath steadied. Her anger burned brighter than her fear. She had not crossed that marble floor seeking revenge. She had crossed it demanding the truth. Because she was not a victim. One day she would become powerful. As silence settled over the frozen lobby, Damien continued studying her face. The sting on his cheek no longer mattered. Beneath the fury in Ivy's eyes, he recognized something impossible to fake. This woman's hatred had not been created by rumors. It had been born from someone his empire had taken. In New York's hidden world, people did not measure power by money alone. They measured it by the number of people who lowered their voices when a single name entered the conversation. Damien Crow was that name. Newspapers described him as a billionaire investor whose companies transformed abandoned neighborhoods into glittering skylines. Governors welcomed him to private dinners. International banks competed for his business. Every public photograph showed a composed businessman wearing an effortless smile. But beneath that polished image stood an empire so carefully constructed that even law enforcement struggled to separate legitimate success from invisible influence. Every port, every shipping lane, every major contract seemed to pass through unseen hands that ultimately answered to one man. Damien Crow was not simply wealthy. He was the king of a kingdom no map could reveal. His empire had not been inherited. It had been built during years of silent war against families that believed fear alone created loyalty. Damien proved them wrong. He understood that power survived longer when people obeyed willingly because they believed resistance was impossible. Rivals disappeared from business without public scandals. Corrupt executives suddenly retired. Criminal organizations collapsed under financial pressure they never saw coming. Entire networks vanished without headlines. Damien rarely needed threats because everyone already understood the cost of standing against him. His greatest weapon had never been violence. It was absolute control over information, money, and opportunity. Inside his organization, one principle outweighed every other law. Loyalty was everything. Every driver, accountant, attorney, and advisor earned trust over years, not months. Once someone became part of Damien's inner circle, they were protected beyond imagination. Families received homes, education, medical care, and financial security. No loyal person was ever abandoned. That promise created devotion stronger than fear. But the opposite rule carried equal certainty. Betrayal erased every privilege without exception. Damien believed trust could only exist when everyone understood its value. Because of that belief, no one inside his empire questioned his decisions. They accepted them before he even spoke. That was why the lobby remained frozen. Every bodyguard surrounding Damien waited for a command they assumed would arrive within seconds. Security personnel stood perfectly still. Hotel executives silently prayed the disaster unfolding before them would somehow disappear. Guests who had witnessed the impossible could barely breathe. The atmosphere had become so heavy that even the music seemed afraid to return. Heart-pounding echoed inside dozens of silent chests, yet Damien Crowe remained motionless. His attention never left Ivy Brooks. His cheek still carried the faint outline of her hand, but he seemed completely uninterested in the insult itself. Instead, his sharp eyes examined every detail she unknowingly revealed. He noticed the exhaustion hidden beneath her determination. He noticed the slight tremble she refused to acknowledge. Most importantly, he recognized something he had spent years studying in both allies and enemies: conviction. Most people confronted powerful men because emotion overwhelmed reason. They shouted, cried, begged, or demanded attention. Ivy had done none of those things. She stood close, refusing to retreat despite knowing exactly who he was. She had already accepted the consequences before crossing the lobby. That made her different. Very different. Damien slowly turned his head toward Victor, the veteran commander of his personal security detail. One subtle glance was enough. Victor understood the unspoken question immediately. Had she come alone? The answer arrived through the smallest movement of Victor's eyes. Yes. No hidden weapons. No backup. No political trap. Only one determined young woman carrying impossible courage. Damien looked back at Ivy. For the first time in years, calculation replaced instinct. Destroying her would satisfy everyone's expectations. Sparing her would confuse every person watching. Confusion created opportunities, and Damien Crowe valued information far more than revenge. If Ivy possessed enough courage to challenge the king publicly, then someone, or something, had given her a reason stronger than fear. He intended to discover it. A quiet whisper spread through the crowd as Damien finally moved. Every guard instinctively prepared for the order they believed was coming. Even Ivy steadied her breath, refusing to look away although she knew her future balanced on the next few words. Damien lifted one hand. Every movement in the lobby stopped. His calm voice carried across the marble floor with effortless authority. Everyone. He paused just long enough for absolute silence to settle. Stand down. Shock rippled through the room. The guards immediately lowered their defensive stance. For the first time in anyone's memory, the King of New York had chosen to protect the woman who had publicly challenged his power instead of destroying her. The moment Damien Crowe ordered everyone to stand down, the atmosphere inside the Kingsley Meridian Hotel transformed in a way no one could explain. Seconds earlier, every person in the grand lobby had expected destruction. Instead, they witnessed restraint from a man who had built his reputation on never tolerating public disrespect. The silence that followed became even heavier because it carried uncertainty. No one understood what Damien was thinking, and that frightened them far more than anger ever could. His security detail immediately stepped back without hesitation. Years of loyalty had taught them one simple truth. They did not need explanations. Damien's decisions were never questioned because every order was made with purpose. If he allowed Ivy Brooks to remain standing, then there was a reason hidden beneath the surface. Still, dozens of curious eyes remained fixed on her. Business executives, politicians, reporters attending the charity gala, and even hotel employees quietly memorized her face. Within minutes, her image would begin spreading through private messages across New York's hidden circles. The anonymous young woman who had challenged the king had instantly become the most recognizable stranger in the city. Ivy could feel the weight of those stares pressing against her from every direction. Her heart pounding refused to slow, yet she forced herself to remain steady. She understood that surviving this moment did not mean she was safe. In many ways, the real danger had only begun. Every person connected to Damien's empire would want answers. His allies would question her motives. His enemies would search for ways to exploit her. Without realizing it, she had stepped into a conflict far larger than the disappearance of her brother. Damien slowly closed the distance between them until only a few feet remained. His expression revealed nothing, but his mind had already shifted away from the public insult. He had spent decades reading people whose survival depended on deception. Ivy's emotions carried no performance. Her anger had roots. Her grief was real. Most importantly, the name Ethan Brooks had awakened a faint memory buried beneath months of forgotten intelligence reports. He looked toward Victor without speaking. Victor understood immediately and discreetly activated the encrypted communication device hidden beneath his jacket. Within moments, Damien's intelligence division began searching every internal report connected to the redevelopment project Ivy had mentioned. Damien continued watching her while information quietly flowed through invisible channels beneath the polished surface of his empire. Less than 2 minutes later, Victor received the first encrypted summary. His face changed. Only slightly. But Damien noticed. Victor stepped close enough that no one else could hear his whisper. The redevelopment division wasn't entirely under our supervision. 3 financial approvals were rerouted through Executive Director Marcus Hale. Damien's eyes narrowed. Marcus Hale. A trusted executive. A man responsible for billions of dollars in legitimate investments. Someone who had served the empire faithfully for nearly 12 years. Victor continued carefully. Several independent complaints disappeared before reaching headquarters. Ethan Brooks submitted evidence 3 weeks ago. The file never reached your office. For the first time that evening, genuine stillness entered Damien's thoughts. The information explained too much. Someone inside his own empire had intercepted reports before they reached him. Someone had manipulated his authority. Someone had used Damien Crow's name to destroy innocent lives while hiding behind his reputation. That was not incompetence. That was betrayal. Damien looked back at Ivy. She had believed he was responsible because every trail had intentionally led toward him. Someone wanted ordinary citizens to hate the king while the real architect remained invisible. Before Damien could question her further, another encrypted alert vibrated against Victor's wrist. This time his expression hardened. Our surveillance team intercepted unusual communications outside the hotel, he murmured. Unknown observers have been tracking Miss Brooks since before she entered the building. They aren't ours. Damien's attention instantly shifted toward the entrance where luxury cars continued arriving for the gala. Behind the polished celebration, unseen players had already begun moving across the board. Ivy had exposed something far more dangerous than either of them realized. The public confrontation had forced hidden enemies into motion. Damien made his decision without hesitation. He looked directly at Victor. No one leaves alone. Then his cold gaze settled on Ivy once more. For reasons she still could not understand, the king who should have destroyed her had activated only one instinct. Protect. Because somewhere beyond those hotel doors, people were already hunting the woman who had dared to challenge his empire. The luxury hotel emptied faster than anyone expected, yet the silence surrounding Ivy Brooks only became heavier. Damien Crow's single command had ended the public confrontation, but it had also created a new reality neither of them could escape. Every ally inside his empire had witnessed him spare the one woman who openly challenged him. Every hidden enemy had witnessed the exact same thing. That alone transformed Ivy into the most vulnerable person in New York. She was no longer simply searching for her missing brother. She had unknowingly become a living weakness connected to the king himself. Damien wasted no time. Within minutes, the hotel's underground exit was secured. Luxury vehicles formed a quiet convoy beneath layers of discreet security. No dramatic orders echoed through the garage because Damien never ruled through noise. Calm authority surrounded him. Victor opened the rear passenger door, expecting Ivy to hesitate. She did. Her eyes moved from the waiting vehicle to Damien's unreadable face. Every instinct warned her not to enter. This was the man she had crossed the city to confront. This was the man she believed responsible for destroying her family. Walking into his car felt less like accepting help and more like surrendering control over her future. "I don't belong with you," she said quietly. Damien held her gaze without the slightest impatience. "No." His answer surprised her. "You belong where your heart is to reach." There was no arrogance in his voice. Only certainty. "Right now, that's with me." The words settled between them with unexpected weight. What? Not spoken aloud, but impossible to ignore. Ivy's breath caught for only a second before she slowly entered the vehicle. The door closed behind her with a quiet click that sounded strangely final. Outside, New York continued moving as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Inside, silence filled the spacious cabin while city lights drifted across darkened windows. For the first time all evening, Ivy noticed Damien without the crowd surrounding him. The intimidating distance created by public attention had disappeared. Sitting close to him revealed details she had never expected. The exhaustion hidden beneath perfectly controlled eyes. The tiny crease between his brows that appeared whenever he thought deeply. The way he watched every passing street without seeming distracted. Nothing about him felt careless. Every movement carried discipline earned through years of impossible responsibility. She had expected arrogance. Instead, she found restraint. Damien noticed her observing him but remained silent. Protecting people had never been part of his plans. Control was easier than trust. Distance was safer than attachment. Yet every report arriving through Victor's secure communications repeated the same conclusion. The people responsible for manipulating his empire now considered Ivy a threat. That fact changed everything. He could not allow them to erase the only witness capable of exposing the hidden corruption spreading beneath his authority. Without looking away from the window, Damien finally spoke. "Until this is finished, you stay where I can protect you." Ivy almost laughed, though no humor reached her expression. "You think protection makes me safe?" "No." His answer came immediately. "It gives you a chance." The honesty unsettled her more than reassurance ever could. The convoy entered the private gates of Crow Manor, an isolated estate overlooking the Hudson River. The residence looked less like a fortress and more like a place deliberately hidden from the world. Security existed, but it blended into the architecture instead of announcing itself. There were no displays of unnecessary force, only quiet preparation. Ivy realized Damien's greatest weapon had always been control over every environment he entered. As she stepped from the vehicle, a cool evening breeze carried the scent of rain through the gardens. She looked around, searching for signs of captivity, but found something unexpected instead. It was beautiful, and somehow that frightened her more. Because beautiful places could become prisons just as easily. Damien stopped beside her. "You'll remain here." His calm voice carried no threat. "No one enters without my permission." Ivy turned toward him, her eyes unwavering. "You still don't understand why I came." For the first time since the hotel, Damien's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. She stepped one pace close, refusing to lower her gaze. "I didn't find you by accident." Her heart pounding, she drew a folded envelope from inside her jacket. "I spent 3 weeks planning how to reach you, because someone wanted to make sure I met the king personally." And in that moment, Damien realized someone had carefully arranged their encounter long before Ivy ever walked into the hotel. The folded envelope rested between Damien Crowe and Ivy Brooks like a silent confession waiting to be opened. Neither of them spoke immediately. Outside the library windows of Crow Manor, rain drifted across the Hudson in slow silver lines, but inside the room, every second carried the weight of answers that could reshape an empire. Damien accepted the envelope without breaking eye contact. Years of experience had taught him that truth often arrived quietly, wrapped inside ordinary paper rather than dramatic declarations. Inside were copies of contracts, financial approvals, handwritten notes, and one small flash drive carefully taped beneath the final page. "I didn't collect those alone," Ivy said, her voice steady despite the tension pressing against her chest. "Ethan spent months investigating before he disappeared. He believed someone inside your organization was stealing more than money. They were stealing your name." Damien's expression remained controlled, but Victor immediately connected the flash drive to the Manor's secure network. Encrypted files appeared one after another across the large screen built into the library wall. None of them contained stolen bank accounts or illegal transactions. Instead, they revealed something far more dangerous. Entire neighborhoods had been secretly transferred to shell corporations Damien had never approved. Families had been forced from businesses through fabricated legal disputes. Charitable foundations carrying Crow Industries' logo had quietly financed projects that never existed. Every fraudulent document carried Damien's official authorization. Every signature was an almost flawless imitation. The room fell silent. Ivy slowly continued. Ethan realized the person responsible wasn't working against your empire. He was hiding inside it. Damien watched each document without interruption. Every page dismantled another piece of certainty he had trusted for years. His empire had survived because loyalty stood above personal ambition. Every executive understood that success belonged to the organization before themselves. Yet someone had quietly transformed that loyalty into a disguise, manipulating Damien's reputation while innocent families paid the price. Victor's fingers moved rapidly across the encrypted files. "There are internal access records attached," he said quietly. The same administrator approved every missing report. Damien stepped closer to the screen. For weeks he had believed Ivy's anger came from misunderstanding. Now he understood something far worse. She had been telling the truth from the beginning. Her family had suffered because someone inside his own organization deliberately redirected investigations before they reached him. Ivy looked toward the photographs appearing beside the financial records. One image showed Ethan Brooks meeting a middle-aged executive inside a downtown cafe only 2 days before disappearing. Another captured the same executive entering restricted Crow Industries offices after midnight using executive security clearance that should never have existed. "I found those after Ethan vanished," Ivy whispered. "He left copies where he knew I would eventually look. He said if anything happened to him, I had to make sure only one person received them." She looked directly at Damien. "You." The single word carried more trust than Damien believed he deserved. For the first time in years, the balance of power inside the room shifted. Ivy was no longer merely a woman under his protection. She possessed information capable of exposing corruption buried deep inside the foundation of his empire. If those responsible learned she had delivered the evidence, every remaining witness connected to Ethan's investigation would be in immediate danger. Victor suddenly froze. "I've recovered the deleted executive authorization logs." He hesitated. His normally composed voice lowered. "They were erased by someone with unrestricted command privileges." Damien's eyes narrowed. Only 4 people possessed that level of access. Himself, Victor, the chief legal advisor, and one final name. Victor opened the recovered file. The authorization codes, financial reroutes, and falsified approvals all pointed toward a single architect. For several long seconds no one spoke. Damien stared at the screen as memories from the past 12 years rearranged themselves into an entirely different picture. Every delayed report, every missing complaint, every unexplained success, every convenient explanation. None of it had been coincidence. It had been planned. His breath slowed, but the quiet in the room became more dangerous than any outburst. Ivy watched his expression change for the first time since they met. Not with anger. With disbelief. Because the man responsible for Ethan's disappearance, the man who had poisoned the empire from within, the man Damien had trusted with every secret, every decision, and every future plan, was Marcus Hale. The one ally Damien Crow had once believed could never commit betrayal. The name Marcus Hale settled over the library like a storm refusing to pass. No one inside Crow Manor moved. For Damien Crow, the discovery struck deeper than any rival's attack ever could. Marcus had stood beside him for 12 years, helping transform a scattered organization into an empire respected by governments, corporations, and allies across continents. He had attended private strategy meetings, protected confidential negotiations, and advised Damien during every major decision. If Marcus truly stood behind the deception, then the greatest danger had never existed outside the empire. It had been sitting beside the king all along. Damien slowly closed the file before him. His expression remained calm, yet Victor recognized the change immediately. This was the silence that appeared only when Damien reached a decision that would permanently alter the future. Personal feelings no longer mattered. Only truth remained. "Seal every executive communication channel," Damien ordered quietly. Victor nodded without hesitation. "No one leaves their assigned division until I approve it." Within minutes, encrypted instructions spread through the empire. Senior executives suddenly found their digital access suspended. Financial transfers required direct authorization. Private meetings were quietly postponed. Every trusted department received identical instructions without explanation. Those who had served Damien faithfully obeyed immediately because loyalty had always been the foundation holding the empire together. But hidden beneath that obedience, another movement awakened. Marcus Hale realized the king had discovered the truth. The invisible war had begun. Unlike ordinary conflicts, no alarms echoed across the city. There were no dramatic confrontations or public displays of force. This battle unfolded through information, trust, and influence. Every hidden account, every confidential contract, and every secret alliance became another battlefield. Allies quietly revealed themselves while others disappeared into uncertainty. Damien understood that striking blindly would only strengthen the real architect behind the conspiracy. Patience would expose those who had mistaken his silence for weakness. Across the manor, Ivy watched the organization respond with remarkable discipline. No one questioned Damien's authority. No one demanded explanations. Yet something unexpected happened. Victor approached her carrying another encrypted tablet. "We need your help." She looked up in surprise. "My help?" Victor nodded. "Ethan documented details our analysts overlooked because he wasn't trained to think like us. You knew how he organized information. You may recognize patterns we can't." For a moment, Ivy simply stared at the screen. Only days earlier she had stood outside this world believing Damien Crowe represented everything she hated. Now the king himself trusted her with protecting the future of his empire. She accepted the tablet. Hour after hour, she compared Ethan's handwritten notes with Marcus Hale's financial records. Slowly, connections emerged that experienced investigators had ignored. Ethan had never chased money alone. He followed relationships. Certain charities repeatedly appeared beside redevelopment projects. The same legal firms surfaced before businesses mysteriously disappeared. Every thread eventually connected to a network Marcus had quietly built beyond Damien's knowledge. Victor watched her work with growing respect. "You think differently." Ivy barely looked up. "Ethan taught me something before he vanished." She highlighted another hidden connection. "He always said lies become complicated. The truth usually repeats itself." The room fell silent. Damien looked toward her. For the first time since they met, he no longer saw only the grieving sister who had walked into a hotel driven by anger. He saw intelligence, courage, and determination that strengthened everyone around her instead of weakening them. She was no longer standing behind events. She was shaping them. She was not a victim. She became powerful. Without realizing it, something else quietly changed. The king no longer stood alone. Beside him stood the first woman who challenged his decisions, earned his trust, and refused to fear his reputation. No title had been spoken aloud, yet everyone inside the library sensed the balance shifting. The empire had found someone capable of standing beside its king rather than behind him. A queen was beginning to emerge. Suddenly Victor's secure communicator vibrated. He opened the intercepted transmission, his face turning pale. "It's Marcus." Damien reached for the device. A pre-recorded message filled the room. Marcus sounded almost calm. "You finally discovered the betrayal, Damien?" A brief pause followed. "But you've been asking the wrong question." Another file automatically appeared across the library screen. "The empire isn't built on my lies. It's built on one secret your father buried before he died." Damien's breath slowed as the encrypted file unlocked. Because if Marcus was telling the truth, the secret waiting inside could destroy the Crow Empire long before any enemy ever could. The encrypted file opened in complete silence. Damien Crowe expected another carefully constructed deception, but instead he found decades of hidden correspondence written by his late father. Every page revealed the same disturbing truth. The Crow Empire had never been founded solely on ambition or power. In its earliest years, several influential businessmen had secretly financed its expansion in exchange for permanent influence over future decisions. Those agreements were meant to disappear once the empire became self-sufficient. Instead, Marcus Hale had quietly preserved every hidden contract, using them as leverage for years while manipulating both allies and enemies from the shadows. He had never wanted to rule openly. He wanted every king to believe they remained in control while he quietly directed the future. Damien finished reading and slowly closed the file. For the first time since inheriting the empire, he understood that protecting its future demanded more than preserving old traditions. Loyalty built on fear eventually weakened. Loyalty built on truth endured. Marcus had mistaken Damien's discipline for blindness, believing the old system would always conceal corruption beneath success. Instead, Marcus had revealed the very weakness that now allowed the empire to change. Within hours, Damien summoned every senior executive to Crow Manor. The gathering carried none of the grandeur usually associated with the organization. No elaborate speeches welcomed them. No displays of authority decorated the room. Damien simply placed the recovered evidence before them and allowed the facts to speak. One by one, decades of hidden manipulation surfaced. Executives who had unknowingly followed Marcus's instructions openly admitted the false directives they had received. Others produced records they had quietly questioned but never challenged. The silence that followed was not born from fear alone. It came from the realization that the empire had nearly collapsed because trust had been given to the wrong man. Marcus never appeared. Instead, another encrypted message arrived. He admitted everything. He confessed that Ethan Brooks remained alive under a protected identity, hidden because Ethan had refused to surrender the evidence exposing the conspiracy. Marcus believed controlling information was stronger than controlling people. Now that every document had reached Damien, his greatest advantage had disappeared. By the time investigators reached Marcus's final known location, he was gone, leaving behind only abandoned offices and empty accounts. His influence had ended, but his absence became its own answer. Several days later, Ethan returned home. He looked exhausted but carried something far more valuable than revenge: the truth. His reunion with Ivy needed no dramatic words. Relief alone erased months of uncertainty. Damien watched from a respectful distance, realizing the empire had almost stolen from her the one thing power could never replace: family. Quietly, he ensured Ethan and every innocent family affected by the conspiracy received complete restoration. Businesses reopened. False legal judgments disappeared. Community projects resumed under transparent oversight. For the first time, Crow Industries became exactly what it had always claimed to be. Then Damien made the decision that surprised everyone. He invited Ivy to stand beside him before the entire leadership council. "There will be changes," he said calmly. "No decision affecting ordinary families will move forward without independent review." His gaze settled on Ivy. She earned that right. No one objected. They had witnessed her courage, intelligence, and unwavering honesty reshape an empire from within. She had entered Crow Manor believing herself powerless. She now stood beside the king as an equal voice whose judgment balanced strength with compassion. She was not a victim. She became powerful. She became the queen the empire never expected but desperately needed. As the council concluded, Damien walked with Ivy onto the balcony overlooking New York. Morning sunlight stretched across the skyline where fear once defined every horizon. For the first time since they met, neither carried the weight of misunderstanding between them. "You changed everything," Damien said quietly. Ivy smiled softly. "No." She looked toward the city awakening below. "We changed it." Their hands rested close together on the stone railing, not claimed by possession but united through shared purpose, mutual loyalty, and earned respect. Far across the river, however, another pair of unseen eyes watched Crow Manor through a high-powered camera. A single photograph captured the king standing beside his new queen. The image was quietly transmitted with one brief message: "Target confirmed." Because somewhere beyond New York, an enemy who had never feared Damien Crow had finally discovered the one person capable of changing his empire forever. And this time, they were coming for the queen. If this story kept you hooked until the very last second, take a moment to hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who loves unforgettable mafia romance stories. Every click tells us to keep creating bigger twists, deeper emotions, and even more powerful characters like Damien and Ivy. But before you go, here's one question I can't stop thinking about. Do you believe Damien truly deserved Ivy's trust? Or was she risking everything by believing a king whose empire was built on fear? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one, and your perspective might inspire the next story.